So, late last night, the government posted a string of documents at the heart of this case about two men who have been accused of spying for China. This case has collapsed. Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry deny allegations of passing on information to China. The Crown Prosecution Service said last month this case is just not strong enough. They said the government did not give them the information that was needed for them to make a successful case. A real he said, she said row going on between who is to blame. Matthew Collins, the Deputy National Security Advisor, has given 3 witness statements to this case. The Tories have called on the government to publish this, accusing Labour of being weak on national security. Here was the exchange yesterday between Kemi Badenoch and Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions.
A serious case involving national security has collapsed because this government is too weak to stand up to China. And if the Prime Minister cannot protect the members of this House, what does that say about his ability to protect this country?
The case did not proceed because the policy of the past government did not meet the test that was necessary. That is the long and the short of it. Far from evading, I have said I will disclose the full witness statements that set out exactly what was in the witness statements, exactly what the subsequent statement says, and the allegation that somehow they were changed, that the first statement and the second statements are different, is completely and utterly unfounded.
And meanwhile, yesterday afternoon, the former advisor Dominic Cummings entered the fray. He said that China had obtained vast amounts of classified government information over a period of many years. He said that they compromised a network used to transfer data across Whitehall, accusing the government of a cover-up. The breach was confirmed by other Whitehall sources. It was said to have been connected to a Chinese-owned company. But last night, the Cabinet Office rejected this, saying it was untrue. However, the former Security Minister Tom Tugendhat, who is at the heart of this China spy case, told Andrew Marr last night that he could be right.
Dominic Cummings, who was advisor to Boris Johnson, before you were Security Minister, I think.
I never worked with him, yeah.
Has suggested that there were deep, deep secrets right across the British state that the Chinese infiltrated and grabbed back then. Do you think that's likely to be the case?
Yes. Look, I don't want to go into the details, but the gist of what Dominic Cummings has put out is correct.
Now, Nick, you've been asking ministers all week about whether China is a friend or a foe.
What the bloody story's all about, but anyway, do go on.
You did understand what the story was about, but it's fair to say none of these ministers quite could answer that question.
Should we see China as friend or foe?
Well, we've been clear there's a whole series of security threats that have come from China. For example, things like transnational repression, for example, things like cyber threats and attacks and industrial espionage and so on. They are also, of course, an important trading partner.
Now, I can tell you what we think about China now. They do pose national security threats to the UK. But in relation to this case, it was not a decision of ministers. It was not a decision of Labour special advisors. This was a question about the evidence provided by the CPS and the judgment they made under previous legislation, no longer in force. I'm disappointed they weren't able to secure prosecution.
The Crown Prosecution Service asked the government for evidence. That evidence was provided. The CPS then took an independent decision, not involving ministers, that the threshold for prosecution had not been met under the law as it stood at the time. Now, subsequently, the law was strengthened. That was under the previous government. Had they made that law change earlier on, perhaps this case would have stood up in court.
That was the Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper, Foreign Office Minister Hamish Falconer and the Housing Secretary Steve Reed. Now, in the past, governments, including the Conservatives, have not wanted to say that China is a threat. But these documents last night, Nick, do say that China is. It says China was carrying out large-scale espionage activities against the UK and that Beijing's intelligence agencies harmed the interests and security of the UK. What has happened here, I think, is that obviously the statements that were provided obviously were much, much stronger under the last government. Now, under this government, this Labour government wants a closer relationship with China. That is, I think, why the CPS have decided we need to drop the case. However, the Tories are accusing them of one big cover-up.
Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, reporting. Has she turned it into a Chinese cracker of a story or all a load of chop suey? Let's bring into the conversation Sir Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, joining me now. Good to have you on board, sir. Mrs Jones in Clapham is busy getting the children up to go to school and looking forward to half-term next week. This is just, pardon my language, politicians slagging off each other, isn't it? That's the reality, Sir Mel. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. No, I'd have to disagree with that. This is a matter of national security. We had two individuals who had been charged with espionage, spying on MPs in our own parliament at the behest of China, and that case collapsed. And
but what does it mean to Mrs. Jones and her family?
Well,
why does it knock on her front door, Sir Mel?
Well, because at the end of the day, we want to live in a society which is safe and secure in the face of lots of threats that we face. They come in all sorts of different forms, but one of them most certainly is China, and that comes in a number of different forms, and espionage is one of them. And as I say, we had a case there which was all ready to go. It collapsed, and it collapsed because the kind of evidence that this government put forward to the CPS upon request was not strong and robust enough to meet the threshold for the case to proceed. And you have to either say, well, look, that's because the ministers, etc., were disengaged, in which case that would be, I think, extremely negligent, or, as is strongly suspected, what they were really about was cozying up to China, allowing this case to collapse because they need them economically, because of the economic fragility that they've created with their own policies.
But surely I can lay that accusation at previous Conservative administrations from what we learnt from Dominic Cummings last night.
Well, I think that's a completely different issue. What Dominic Cummings... Well, on the one hand, we're looking at a situation with this collapse case where I believe it is the negligence or the deliberate intention of this government actually to allow this case to collapse, and then a subsequent attempt to cover it up because they've actually got no backbone at all to stand up to China. In the case of the Dominic Cummings situation, it's not clear actually at this stage exactly what may or may not have happened, whether the highest security strap data may have been compromised or not. There are different views circulating on that, but that would be a very serious matter in itself, and a case of a breach of our security, which I think is a different issue to the role that the government has played in the collapse of this Chinese spy case.
Final comment on an unrelated story. You may be aware of research done by Pensions UK that shows the cost of living crisis has worsened under Labour. Nearly half the nation, 44%, feeling poorer now than they did 12 months ago. Shadow Chancellor, a comment on that from you, if you would.
Well, this is a consequence, I'm afraid, of the choices that this government took. They said when they were in opposition they wouldn't come in and raise taxes, they would go for growth. They came in, they slapped taxes on businesses, they destroyed growth by doing that, talked down the economy, borrowed a lot of money, spent a lot of money, and that has driven higher inflation, higher interest rates, and the kind of economic mess that we're in. And I'm afraid real people up and down the country are suffering from that. And of course, what we know now is we're heading into a budget at the end of November in which tax rises are most certainly on the cards, and people are going to feel the pinch even more, I'm afraid.
Or should we be heartened by the news, which you won't have seen yet, I don't think, the UK economy expanded by 0.1% in August, according to official figures just released. Does that hearten us?
Well, not really. I mean, look, any growth is to be welcomed, of course, and those figures will be subject to revision through time, but that's pretty anemic, and the overall growth story is very weak. There's a clear choice here, Nick, and we set it out at our conference, and that is that there are savings to be made across government. We've set out £47 billion worth.
Okay.
If the government gets a grip, gets a backbone and has a plan and actually comes forward with savings, they can spare us these taxes. And really, that is the challenge to put to Rachel Reeves before the budget.
Got to leave it there. Grateful as ever for all your inputs. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, thank you.